Hi, and welcome to my first video about books. Right, I'm going to be doing a series of videos to bolster my personal statement for university, which I probably shouldn't mention here. This is the first one for my English literature playlist. First thing, book I've been reading a bit by bit over the summer. This one, World War Z. Mostly because I heard the film was coming out and that it wasn't based on the book at all, and I saw this in Forbidden Planet. It was signed, £1 off, which is, marvellous. And I figured, hey, why not? Buy it. For a 300 odd page book, it's surprisingly epic. And that goes to its credit because Lord of the Rings, the first part of that, Fellowship, is split into two books in the actual chapters, book 1 and book 2. And book 1 spends half the time telling you what direction the hobbits were going in when they're crossing over through the Shire, past Bree, then moving with Strider, past Weathertop, and it's just a bit too much. I mean, I know he's building a world and making an epic saga, which, is amazing, but let's be honest, do I really need to know exactly what direction they went and exactly how the weather was over each consecutive day? And no, I want you to tell me how many days they went and then how they got there. And when it starts picking it up to do that later on, after Frodo gets stabbed in the shoulder, it feels disingenuous, whereas World War Z is marvellous in how it paints this broad picture of a war. It's a huge conflict, and a lot of it is like a resistance movement, and then it goes into the total war in the last last third of the book. That's what's good about it. It doesn't go for the same amount of depth, but for breadth. And the chapters are interesting because it's divided up into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sections, with the eighth section being the epilogue, and each of these is divided into different interviews. It's an oral history of the zombie war, which means that it's told in an interview style, and some of these interviews barely have any questions. It's just someone narrating it, and that can take a while to get used to, because what they do is, what Max Brooks does, he tells a story from multiple perspectives across multiple different times and places across the period. It's always clear that what's happening is he's interviewing someone after the fact, and several years after the fact of the event. A war which supposedly in the book takes at least 10 years, and then this is 10 years after the war has ended. So it does feel strange to call a conflict with zombies a war, but these guys just don't stop, and that's what's really interesting about it. This is written by a guy who, if you hadn't twigged already, he clearly loves the genre, and he clearly has a huge affection for just zombies and their mythos. I mean, there's a great line towards the end where a guy who works on undersea operations to make sure that zombies can't be interfering with oil rigs and covering for beach landings and making sure that zombies don't come up from the beach, because apparently zombies can survive underwater because they're zombies, just says, nothing corrodes like salt water, yet these bastards have been here for fucking years. How are they not melted yet? It doesn't make any sense, but they are. I'm not a scientist, what can I do? It's an almost just going over your head, just like, I don't know what's going on, we'll just put it onto the book. But the thing is, it's in the moment really easy to disregard because it's told from that guy's perspective, and he's just like a gun. He's a gun underwater doing all different things. And the best parts of the book are all of it. It's very hard to pick your favourite section because the intro, where it tells you how the plague begins, is very slow build, and then it starts to give you more stuff spreading out into the world. For example, once Israel puts up all its walls, one of the only things in common with this book and the film is that in both, Israel builds all the walls high enough and stops letting people in, whilst also letting people in. Yeah, not making any sense at all. But after that, it starts to become a case of, what if Israel is right and something bad is coming? I mean, of course something bad is coming, and giant horde of zombies are going to come and, kill you. That's not very pleasant at all. Or they'll turn you into a zombie, and then, they have more people to, kill. That's the amazing part. It's a really detailed book. As far as, it's a book built around point of view, which is one of those, techniques you'll get in English literature AS level. So, right, you get 6 techniques: point of view, voice, setting place, character, And there's only 4. I don't know why I said there was 6 at all. But it's built around point of view. It's built around giving all these different characters a view on what's happening and telling them telling you, the reader, what's happened. But from all these different characters, telling an interviewer what's happening, and you want to ask the questions. And the interviewer Max Brooks does a good job of communicating natural questions from a reader. And even if they're not your natural questions, it helps broaden your understanding of it. That it's a book going for breadth and not depth in that sense. Because it goes back to a couple of characters now and then, telling different parts of the story. One character who keeps popping up is a soldier named Todd, who pops up in the first battle the US Army makes against the zombies at a place called Yonkers in New York, where they use all manner of old techniques and new weaponry to fight the zombie horde, when none of it matters. None of it can fight this horde of millions of zombies coming at you, when they're all just sandbagged on a road instead of in one of the fortified buildings with tanks and giant rocket launchers which won't stop a zombie. You just need to shoot them in the head. And that's the brilliant part. But it just goes completely foobar, and you can tell it's going to go foobar from the start, because we are told it's going to go foobar from the start. As a novel, it's interesting how it eschews the typical narrative form. You know, there's not necessarily a goal. It's about survival. It's about resistance, and it just progresses on and on and on and on and on and on and on with all these different characters' stories and how they deal with it and what happens to them. I mean, one of the stories involves a pilot who makes all these drops to resistance zones in the west of America. And she crashes one day, or something goes wrong with her plane, and she falls out, parachutes. But then she spends a couple of days on the road talking to someone who is guiding her to be picked up. And then something at the end of the chapter happens, similar to the ending of the Life of Pi film, where you suddenly think, I'm not sure how I feel about that. You might just have lied to me the entire time, and I don't know if you are. You probably were. And not to be too explicit in spoiling things, if you haven't seen Life of Pi, good, you won't know what I'm talking about. But it's just, the only complaint I would have about reading this book is that none of the characters' points of view seem to have their own distinct voice. They have, tones of speaking, these methods, different punctuation, different words using, and that's all very good. It shows, attention to detail. But as they're all speaking in English, and as they're or at least being reported back to you in English, and it just doesn't, there isn't a distinct voice, so it all comes across as just one guy reiterating all these different stories, like a history documentary. But then in the end, that's what it is. It is World War Z, an oral history of the zombie war. It's not about telling you a typical story. It's about being very straight-faced about what would happen in the event of a zombie apocalypse, which, the more I say it, the more ridiculous it sounds. And that's the amazing part of the book, is that it does not make fun of this. It takes it very seriously and makes it all the more terrifying. One great quote from Empire's review of it a while ago said, "As a horror story is exciting," which it very well is. There's some really good points in it during a chapter called The Great Panic, and during a chapter called Total War, and little resistance parts all around the world and above, where it's scary, but maybe not because of dark alleyways and dark buildings and strange noises and the constant run, but inevitability of the zombies, of death. But the quote from Empire then goes on to say, as a parable, it's terrifying, which it is. The battle at Yonkers, which is probably my favourite part of the book, just for how foobar the entire thing goes, it is amazing because it feels totally real, it feels totally straight-faced, and very, very scary for it. World War Z is a very different type of book, a very different type of fiction and science fiction for me. It's small, but epic. It's got breadth, but it's not lacking in depth, but it's not focused on it, which contradicts something I said earlier, but that's the thing. It's a very interesting novel, and it's really, really hard to tell you exactly why it's so good, except for the fact it's a very straight-faced take on the zombie apocalypse without seeming utterly ridiculous, which is an achievement in and of itself. frankly, as far as dystopian science fiction novels go, of a modern era, you're going to have a lot of trouble beating that, because it really, really doesn't. It really takes its stuff seriously and really paints quite a traumatizing picture. It's not cheerful, but it's a thrill to read.